In this tutorial, I'm going to show you something really awesome you can do with Python. You're going to learn how to process spreadsheets. And this is extremely valuable in situations where you have hundreds or thousands of spreadsheets that need to be updated. If you want to do this by hand, it may take hours, days, weeks, or even months. You can simply build a Python program in less than half an hour and have that Python program automatically process thousands of spreadsheets in under 1 second. So here we're going to work on this Excel spreadsheet. You can download this below this video. In this spreadsheet, we have 3 columns: transaction ID, product ID, and price. Now, don't worry about the 4th column yet. So in this spreadsheet, we record all kinds of transactions. But let's say due to an error, it could be a human error or a system error, the price that we have here is wrong. Let's say we need to decrease this by 10%. If you want to do this manually, we'll have to come back here and add a formula. So we type out equal sign. Let's say we want to recalculate the value of this cell, that is C2. So we'll have to get that and then multiply it by 0.9. So that is like the 90% of the original price. We are reducing the price by 10%. Now when we hit enter, you can see the updated price. Next, we'll have to come back here, select this cell, and then apply the same formula to all the other rows. Now, what if we have thousands of rows here? We'll have to scroll up and down. This is going to be very tedious. So we're going to write a Python program that will do this for us. It's going to automate this process. And not only that, it will also add this beautiful chart right here. Once again, if you want to open up hundreds or thousands of spreadsheets and add a chart to each one, this is going to take at least a week or 2. Our Python program is going to do all of this in a matter of seconds. So let's get started. All right, the first thing I want you to do is to download this transactions file and add it to your project. I'll put the link below this video for you to download. So if you're wondering how to put this in this project, you can simply right-click the project. And if you're on Mac, you have this item, Reveal in Finder. If you're on Windows, you should see something like Reveal in Explorer or File Explorer or Windows Explorer. Whatever it's called, when you click this, this opens up the directory on your machine where this project is stored. So you can simply copy and paste the transactions file right here. Now, here on the top, first we need to import the OpenPy Excel package. So import OpenPy Excel. We can give it an alias to make our code shorter. So as Excel. This is not required, but it just makes our code a little bit cleaner. Let me show you. So now instead of typing OpenPy Excel dot, we type XL dot. Okay, so that's an alias for this package. Now in this package, we have a function for loading an Excel workbook. So let's call load workbook. And as the argument, we pass transactions dot XLSX. So this will load our Excel workbook and return a workbook object. Okay. Now if you open this workbook, you can see you have only one sheet, and that is called sheet 1. So to access that, we use square brackets and specify the name of the sheet. That is sheet 1. Make sure to spell this with a capital S because this is case sensitive. If you don't spell it properly, you're going to get an error. So this returns our first sheet. Now in this sheet, we have various cells. So next you need to learn how to access a particular cell. And that is very easy. Back to PyCharm. With this sheet object, we can use square brackets and give the coordinate of a cell. The coordinate is the combination of the column and the row. For example, this cell, its coordinate is A1. So back to PyCharm, here we can type A1 and this returns our first cell. There is also another approach to get a cell. Instead of using square brackets with a string, we can use the cell method of the sheet object. So sheet.cell, we pass the row and the column. So row 1 and column 1. This returns the exact same cell. Now let's print the value of the cell. So cell.value and run our program. So the value is transaction ID. Beautiful. So now we need to iterate over all these rows. And for each row, we need to get the value in the 3rd column. That is the price. We'll get that and then multiply it by 0.9. So first we need to know how many rows we have in this spreadsheet. We can get that from the sheet object. So sheet has an attribute called max underline row. Let's print this. So in this sheet, we have 4 rows, and you can verify that here. So we have a total of 4 rows. So we need to add a for loop that would generate the numbers 1 to 4. So let's delete this print statement and add a for loop for row in. We're going to use the range function to generate a range of numbers starting from 1 all the way to sheet.max underline row plus 1. The reason we're adding 1 to this is because, as I told you before, this range function would generate numbers starting from this value all the way to this value, but it will not include the second value. So currently max row returns 4. If we use range of 1 to 4, this would generate the numbers 1, 2, and 3, but not 4. So to include 4, we need to add 1 to it. Let's go back here. So we type sheet.max underline row plus 1. Now, before going any further, let's just print row and make sure our program is working up to this point. So let's run this. We get the numbers 1 to 4. Beautiful. So now we can easily get the cells in the third column. However, we don't really want this first cell, that's the heading. So technically, we want to ignore the first row. Back here, we want to change our range function and start from 2. Okay? Now, we're going to use sheet.cell to get access to the cell at this row, and the column should be 3. We get a cell object. Let's print its value and make sure we're on the right track. So run our program. These are the values we get: 5.95, 6.95, and 7.95. These are the values in the third column. Beautiful. Next, we need to multiply each value by 0.9. So instead of printing cell.value, we multiply it by 0.9, and this is the corrected underline price. So this is the mistake we're going to fix with our program. Now we need to add a new cell to our worksheet. So we want to add all the corrected prices in a new column. We could also overwrite the values in this column, but in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to add a new column. So using the same method, now we need to get a reference to the cell in the given row, but in the fourth column. So we call sheet.cell and pass row and 4 as the arguments. Once again, this returns a cell object. Let's store that in a separate variable and call it corrected underline price underline cell. So note that my variable names are very descriptive. There is no guesswork. We have corrected price, which holds the actual value, and we have corrected price cell, which is a cell object in this spreadsheet. Next, we need to set the value for this cell. So we set corrected price cell dot value to this corrected price. With these few lines, we can easily update our spreadsheet. But first, we need to save it. So after our for loop, we call workbook.save. Now let's save this in a new file. So we don't want to accidentally overwrite the original file in case our program has a bug. So I'm going to call that transactions2.xlsx. Now finally, let's run our program. So you can see that happened in a split of a second. Now here we have a new file, transactions2. When we open this, we get something like this. So you can see we have this fourth column with the updated prices. Beautiful. So half of the problem is solved. Now we need to add a chart here. To add a chart, we need to import a couple of classes on the top. So after this import statement, let's type out from openpyxl.chart import bar chart, comma, reference. So let's see what's going on here. In this package, we have a module called chart. And from this module, we're importing 2 classes, bar chart and reference. Again, look at the naming convention used here. The first letter of every word is capitalized. Also, it's better to add a line break after our import statements to make our code cleaner. So before we save our workbook, we need to add a chart to the current sheet. First, we need to select a range of values. For this exercise, I'm going to select the values in the fourth column. So all the values in rows 2 to 4. These are the values I'm going to use in our chart. Now, in this particular example, it doesn't really make sense to add a chart per transaction, but that doesn't really matter. We just want a bunch of numbers to create a chart. So after our for loop, we're going to use the reference class to select a range of values. Now, the first argument and the constructor is the sheet. So we pass our sheet here. Then we add 4 keyword arguments. The first one is min underline row. We set this to 2. The second one is max underline row. We set this to the maximum row in this sheet. That is sheet.max underline row. So we want to select the cells in row 2 to 4. Okay. Now to make this code a little bit cleaner, I'm going to put this on a new line so you can see clearly. Now this is going to select all the cells in all the columns in these rows. That's not what we want. We only want the values in the 4th column. So back here, we need to set a couple more keyword arguments. Min underline col or column, we set that to 4. And also max underline col, we set that to 4 as well. So we're limiting the range of cells we're selecting to the 4th column. Okay. Now we're creating an instance of the reference class. Let's store the result in a variable called values. So this values object will have all these values in the 4th column. Now we're ready to create a chart. So we create an instance of the bar chart class and store it in this object. Next, we call chart.add underline data and pass our values. That is pretty straightforward. Finally, we need to add this chart to our sheet. So we call sheet.add underline chart and pass this chart object. We should also specify where we want to add this chart. Let's say we want to add it here on row 2 after the 4th column. So the coordinate of this cell is E2, and this is going to be the top left corner of our chart. So as the coordinate, I'm going to pass E2. That's all we had to do. Done. Let's run our program one more time. Beautiful. Let's open up the updated workbook. And here's the end result. So right after the 4th column, we have this beautiful chart. Now we could take this to the next level. We could add a legend here. We could change the color of these bars. We could even use a different kind of chart. It doesn't have to be a bar chart. So to learn more about this, you can read the documentation for OpenPy Excel. So our program is complete, but our code is dirty. It's not clean. It's not organized. We don't have any functions here. We have written all the code in app.py. So let's go ahead and organize this code like a professional software developer. So on line 4, we're loading our workbook. Then we're getting a reference to the first sheet, but we don't really need these 2 lines here. This was purely for demonstration to show you how you can access a cell. So let's delete these unnecessary lines. This is a very important practice. As you're coding, always look at your code, always review it. See if you have some code that is not used. Always delete those. Okay, next we're iterating over all the rows, fixing the prices, and then we select these values to add a chart, and finally we save the workbook. Now, if we were going to use this to automate the process of updating thousands of spreadsheets, this program wouldn't work because it's only relying on this file. So we want to reorganize this code and move it inside of a function. This function should take the name of the file as an input. So let's define a function. Let's call it process underline workbook. It gets a file name. Now we move all the code inside of this function. So let's select everything and then press tab. Beautiful. Now back to our function. Instead of loading this transactions file, we're going to load this file name. That's better. Also, now that our program is working properly, there's really no need to store the result in a separate file. So here we can simply overwrite the same file. So let's pass file name. That is the end of our function. So now we have this reusable function. We can simply reuse this to process thousands of spreadsheets. Earlier in this Python course, you learned how to find all the files in a directory. So you can get each file in a directory and pass the name of the file to this function. This function will go ahead and update that spreadsheet in just a second or less.